It's impossible to know exactly what life will be like in another country, no matter how much research you do ahead of time. Your experience will be uniquely yours, and you're gonna learn so much more after you move. Only after living in your new home for a bit can you look back and reflect. So that's what I'm doing here in today's video. Let's get right into a few examples of things I learned about life in France only after I moved, including some little things, some harder hitting things, and maybe a few that might surprise you. Okay, number one, there are cars on the road that don't require a driver's license. And when I came to France, I immediately noticed these small, somewhat loud cars that were from brands I had never heard of. And I just figured, oh, French cars are like this. But actually, they looked a little different than all the other cars, and they definitely sounded more like a small motorcycle from afar. And then you'd turn your head expecting to see a motorcycle, and boom, this little funny-looking car would drive by. Tom actually explained these are called voitures sans permis. Yes, cars without licenses that don't require a French license. And while they don't really go fast enough to go on a highway and I guess do any major damage, you know, a driver who doesn't know the rules of the road can be dangerous to the rest of us, no matter, you know, where they are. They could still get in accidents themselves or cause accidents wherever they're driving. So the question I had was, why do people opt for this type of car that doesn't require a French license? And there are a few reasons. The most common being people who don't want to pursue a regular license will opt for this car because maybe they don't need to do more than a quick few errands around town once or twice a month, or maybe it's too expensive or too time-consuming to get a regular license and car if you don't need to, you know, drive it that much. Just for price comparison, one of these voitures sans permis can run you 8,000 euros, even up to 15,000. So they're not super cheap when new. The most popular reason is people who have had too many alcohol-related infractions. That's what Tom thinks, just people who can't get a regular license at this point. Third is for teenagers who aren't yet old enough to drive. I had a friend whose daughter got a car like this when she was 16. Really nice gift. It's pretty rare, you know, a family needs to have the means, but usually young teens will drive a scooter or like a small motorbike type of thing, and you can get that from age 14. The regular driving age here is 18, and you will see teenagers driving these cars that don't require permits. Next up, you will not become perfectly fluent in French just by living in France. It doesn't work that way. This is a huge misconception about language learning, and something I hear mostly from people who maybe have never really tried to learn another language. Language learning doesn't happen by osmosis, and you don't pick up a language to perfection. Living in France does put you face to face with native speakers, so if you take advantage of speaking with them, it can help, but it doesn't automatically make you fluent in French over time. So yes, of course, you're gonna learn words, you're gonna learn phrases and expressions, and you know, maybe you'll become conversational and be able to get by just by living in France and picking it up. But just living here doesn't in and of itself make you able to speak like a native. It only takes you so far. Just an example, growing up back in New Jersey, there were plenty of friends that I had whose parents were not born in the US, and they really spoke broken English. They never studied English to a point of professional fluency. They'd been in the US for 20, 30 years at that point, you know? So just because you immigrate to a country doesn't automatically make your language of that country passable. To reiterate, you're not going to become amazing at French just by living here. Your ability to improve really lies entirely on you and what you bring to the table. And just on the flip side, you don't need to live in a country to become fluent. My husband, Tom, is a perfect example of that. He speaks wonderful English and has never lived in an English-speaking country. What will living in France do for your language skills? It'll give you the opportunity. It will bring you face to face with these native speakers and give you access, and that counts for a lot. So, you know, that'll help you with comprehension, and if you're willing to put in the work, you're motivated, you're gonna do your work on the back end, you'll get to where you wanna go. But just living here in and of itself is not gonna make you perfectly fluent. So you're not going to learn the intricacies of French grammar solely by listening to those around you. It doesn't work that way. You're not going to learn the reasons behind why you need to use a certain verb tense, or you know, why an expression is constructed in this way. You're not going to learn all about those grammar rules just by being in France. So, you know, there are a lot of grammar rules, and it's kind of funny sometimes because the French, They seem to love, their language, which is great. And it's incredible, really. You'll hear French people correcting each other. You'll see it in comments on forums, even on YouTube, people debating the proper grammar of a sentence. And if you think English grammar can be annoying or even complicated, it pales in comparison to French, So yeah, learning the language, I feel at least to an intermediate level, is essential for integrating into French life. It's not only going to help you just to speak, it's going to help you to understand the culture and the people and kind of become one with everything that's happening around you and not just be a bystander. So when you speak the language, it feels really rewarding to do so. And just by being here, you don't just magically pick it up. You need to do some work on your own. Next, pine processionary caterpillars can be dangerous. I learned about these caterpillars several years ago when Dagny and I were out on a walk because I saw them crossing the street and I thought it was weird, and I'd never seen a huge chain, like tail to nose, huge chain of caterpillars crossing the street. And I'm like, that's weird. They look kind of cool. I was in awe of them. And there's something I'd never seen before growing up in the Northeast US. The species just wasn't native to anywhere that I had lived in the USA. As it turns out, they're really quite common here where I live in the springtime, and I only learned about them because I took a picture and I posted it on Instagram. And as it turns out, they're quite dangerous to small animals like dogs and even small children. After I posted this picture, a French woman commented right away and warned me to get my dog the heck away from them. And basically this veterinary hospital explains exactly why they are dangerous. They say, quote, "Each hair is a sealed ampoule containing a toxin called tomotopion. These hairs turn to a point that can bury into their victims like harpoons. And then that hair bursts, liberating the toxin." What are the signs that you've been affected by the caterpillar's hair? Swelling of the lips, the muzzle and the face, and abundant drooling are the first signs. And then these can be followed by itching around the head, restlessness, and constant rubbing of the affected area and the face. And then the part that scared me to death, what she told me, was that when contact with the tongue happens, there's serious inflammation and sloughing of the affected parts. And as time goes on, it can lead to gangrene. And my vet actually told me that she's had to amputate dogs' tongues or parts of it because they're affected by this toxin. So this is not a joke. These aren't things that you find just deep in the forest. They were walking across a residential sidewalk here in a small town in France, not out in the rural area. And they come down from the pine trees, right? So they're common. And if anyone you know has a dog and either lives in Europe or may visit, and maybe some areas of the US, tell me below, just keep an eye out for these chains of caterpillars. Although they look interesting, avoid them at all costs, especially, if you have a small child with you or a small pet. They make their nests up in the pine trees and then they come down, and they're very dangerous to small kids who, want to put their hands everywhere and touch everything, or my dog who wants to sniff everywhere. So admire them from afar or don't. They are seen as pests in some towns. And like mine, the city hall has an extermination program in place to pretty much get rid of them when an area becomes overrun with these pests. So keep an eye out for pine processionary caterpillars. Next, gas and tolls are really expensive. Road trips in France will cost you, and really the cost of tolls and gas, they add up. To give you an example, going from Angers, out where I live, to Paris by car, it's about a 3.5–4 hour trip. It will cost you 30 euros in tolls on the highway and another 30 euros in fuel for a total of 60 euros or about $71 US one way. You can absolutely minimize tolls by taking the back roads or taking public transport like the train. But if you do opt to drive, keep in mind that gas is going to add up. And of course, that depends on the length of your trip, and the price of gas. Right now, a liter of diesel in my area is 1.32. Gasoline is €1.51, and there are 3.78 liters in 1 US gallon. So some quick math, if you drive with a diesel vehicle with today's exchange rate, 1 US gallon of diesel fuel costs just under $6 US. And even more if you drive a car that takes gasoline. Ours is a diesel. I did an entire video on driving that I'll link here in case it's of interest. And I will say one thing I'm so happy to point out is for that price, although it's expensive, The autoroutes are really well maintained, so you're not going to find these huge potholes that's going to blow out your tire. You won't find debris in the road. You're not going to find crap left and right and just poorly maintained roads. They're good. Service areas too are well equipped. I love the rest stops. Here's a tip. Avoid getting gas on the autoroute unless you have to, because the prices at these rest stops are much higher than they'd be elsewhere. And I don't just mean like 1 or 2 cents, so you don't even notice. They're significantly higher per liter. So if you're not in a hurry, or your flashing out of gas light isn't blinking, get gas elsewhere. And if you prefer a scenic drive and you have the time, take the back roads to save a few bucks. Next is making friends would be hard. And yeah, making friends as an adult can be hard anywhere you live. It's not specific to France, not at all. When you're a newcomer somewhere and then you add in the language differences, especially when you don't speak it well when you've just arrived, you add in the different culture, and maybe you live in a small town instead of a big city, those are all obstacles that can make it more difficult. And this is especially true, I found, because the French tend to be close friends with people they grew up with and carry those friends through life, and maybe not quite as open to meeting new people. And it's not that I thought making friends would be easy, but I figured people would maybe be a little more open, especially when you're getting involved in activities that are similar to other people, and really putting yourself out there, as I've done and continue to do, like joining a gym, taking a class like cooking, that sort of thing. Also joining meetup groups. There's a site called On Va Sortir, and I even went to a Mormon church. Despite not being religious. I'm not Mormon, I'm not anything, but I just wanted to put myself out there. And nothing really panned out where I clicked with people. Again, it's my experience. I hope yours is different. It makes me so much more grateful for the friends that I do have all over the world, and I work really hard to maintain those relationships, even if they're at a distance. Next is that life problems can seem magnified when you're so far away from everything you used to know. In a place that doesn't feel like you're home just yet, complete, with all those people that you know and just the way things are done, it can be really hard to cope, when life gets hard, regular life problems. And I think in general, it's really easy to jump into something new and exciting and focus on the positives and to focus on what we're looking forward to. I think that's great, especially when it comes to living abroad, focus on what's ahead. And that's so worthwhile, but I also think it's worthwhile to pay attention to the possibilities of not all the great things, the things that you might need to work on, or the hard times you might encounter. Because when these hard times do hit, you don't want to be caught by surprise. You want to have a plan so you're more prepared. And, when I say hard times, I mean things like friendships that break up, family changes, buying a house, having a child, a death in the family, maybe a marriage, illness, financial difficulties. All of these life problems I found are much more difficult to manage when you're so far away from the systems and the people and the norms that you found comfortable and that you know. And FaceTime can only help so much. Sometimes you just want to be close to the people you care about most, in the flesh. And yeah, it's really hard to experience life through a screen. In person is so much better, but it's not always possible. And I just feel like when you go through these tough times, the added fact that you're far from the comforts of home, and again, how things are done and your support system, and then you're in a new culture with a new language that doesn't roll off your tongue quite as easily as English, all of this together can make tough times feel even more challenging. And until you live through it, it's really hard to know in advance how you'll manage, how you'll react, how you'll cope or not. Next, medical norms are different in France. And as with many things I'm mentioning here and that I mention often in my videos, it's only normal that things are different. You gotta roll with it. France is another country, of course things are different. But they can still be quite a learning experience or a surprise if you aren't expecting them. And to that end, on medical things, I did a whole video on going to the doctor in France, so I'll link that here. But I'm talking about little things like not being given a gown at the gynecologist. Also having to go to the pharmacy yourself to pick up your own vaccine vial at the pharmacy and then bring it with you to the doctor to inject, instead of maybe the doctor's office having your medications on hand, like a regular vaccine. Also not being able to get Advil or diarrhea medication discreetly at the grocery store and running to self-checkout, and having in France to have to speak to someone at the pharmacy and say, I have the runs, and it's super embarrassing, right? They're used to it, but still, you can't even get over-the-counter medicine discreetly at the grocery store. So these are all things I learned about moving to France after I moved. Next, and maybe the most important, the vast majority of French people do not fit into the stereotypes you've heard. It's really hard to not be influenced by the media about all things French, right? You've heard the French are rude, they're snobby, they're thin. They're basically these intimidating little unicorns who are experts on everything food, wine, sophistication, and living the good life, you know? It's hard to get a real feel for the French if you've never been here. If you come on vacation for a few weeks here and there, or if you only go to Paris. And I found it so interesting what you notice and what affects you once you realize you're no longer just passing through. When you start a life somewhere, you start to notice and really get a feel for the people. And for me, I've noticed that the vast majority of French people do not fit the negative stereotypes that you've heard. You know, these different things we've been led to believe on Emily in Paris and other TV shows and films, and that's a good thing. Just to be clear, yeah, you're gonna find all kinds of people in France. Some do fit the stereotype, it's normal. But I've learned time and time again that people don't fit into these little boxes we have, you know, outlined in our minds. There are all different types of people here, from all walks of life, and they like doing all different types of things. And yeah, that might sound like common sense, like of course not everyone fits into a box, but you know what, before you live somewhere, it's so easy to buy into the stereotypes because you've only been to Paris, or you've only watched a certain movie or show that portrays people a certain way, or you've only taken a vacation once and it was years ago. You know, France has people who are black, who are white, who are brown, business owners, hard workers, people who game the system, fashionistas, people who don't care what they really dress like, religious people, poor people, kind people, bilingual people and not, and people, of course, who are open-minded and closed-minded. France has it all. Finally, I will always tell you that the best way to learn is by doing, even if you mess up, because if you fail, you really haven't failed, you've learned something, right? And you can only anticipate so much before making a major life change, so just jump into it, and I hope that some of the things I've mentioned here will help you if you plan on moving to France, or at least just open your eyes a little bit to some of the little things, and some not so little things, that people like me have experienced living abroad in France. So I would love to know what you think of these things, if you've experienced them, or let me know some of the big and small things that you've learned after you moved to France or even other countries. I'd love to hear it. And I've listed just a few examples here. My list wasn't exhaustive, so I could always do a part 2. I have a lot more to say on this, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, check out my merch below. All of that helps to support my channel. And lastly, some of you have asked me, someone actually just this week asked how you can support my channel, you know, if you don't want to buy merch, if I have a Patreon or something to that end. And while I don't have a Patreon, I do have a donation link below where you can buy me a virtual coffee in an increment of $3 each. So if you'd like to support my channel in that way and support my efforts here on Oui In France, that link is there for you below. And shout out to my longtime supporter, a really nice man named John Folks in the UK, who was the first ever to buy me a virtual coffee. So thank you, John. I hope you make it to La Rochelle soon with your daughter. I know you've been looking forward to that trip for a couple years now. So once the pandemic's over, I look forward to hearing about it. Merci encore to John, to everyone, and I will see you right back here on Oui In France soon. Salut!